Hey everyone, I need some advice about my family situation because it's honestly a mess right now. My daughter and stepson hate each other's guts, and it's gotten so bad that my wife and I are constantly stuck in the middle of their fights. We're arguing way more than we used to, and our marriage is really suffering because of all this drama. I just don't know what to do anymore. So here's the deal, I'm 49 and married to my second wife Kira, who's 46. We've been married for 4 years. She's got a 20-year-old son named Jill from her first marriage, and I have a 15-year-old daughter Ellie from mine. Ellie's mom died in a car accident when she was just 7 years old. That was really rough on both of us, but especially on Ellie since she was so young. I had to step up and be both mom and dad, which wasn't easy at all. We went through a lot of therapy and struggled for a while, but eventually found our rhythm as just the two of us. After being on my own for a few years, I met Kira at this tennis club where our kids took lessons. She'd been divorced for a while and seemed really nice. We started hanging out more and more, and things just clicked between us. Both of us were lonely and thought we'd found someone perfect to share our lives with. Nobody tells you how hard it is to blend two families together, especially when the kids are so different. We knew there would be some problems, sure, but we had no idea it would turn into such a nightmare. When we introduced our kids to each other, Ellie was actually pretty cool about everything. She really liked having Kira around since she hadn't had a mom figure in her life for years. She was 11 at the time and going through all that preteen stuff, so having a woman to talk to was exactly what she needed. Kira was great with her too, they would do girly stuff together like shopping and getting their nails done. But Jill? Total opposite. He was 16 and acted like a typical moody teenager who couldn't care less about his mom's new relationship. He barely spoke to any of us and spent most of his time in his room or out with friends. Kira kept saying it was because of his dad's influence and bad attitude, but promised me Jill was actually a good kid deep down and would come around eventually. So we got married and they moved in with us. It was a huge upgrade for them. They'd been living in this tiny apartment, and now Jill got this massive room to himself in my 4-bedroom house. Ellie wasn't jumping for joy about having a new brother or anything, but she was willing to give it a shot. Problem was, Jill didn't even try to be nice to her. At first they just ignored each other, which honestly wasn't that bad. I figured if they weren't talking to each other, at least they weren't fighting. But then Jill started being a real jerk to Ellie. He'd make these mean comments about her clothes or how she looked, just enough to hurt her feelings but not enough for us to really call him out on it. Ellie would try to stand up for herself sometimes, but she was just a kid and he'd always find ways to make her feel worse. At first Kira and I tried to play it off like normal sibling stuff, but it got to a point where we had to step in because Ellie was clearly having a rough time. That just made Jill even more of a pain. He'd act like we were picking on him whenever we told him to knock it off. I kept thinking maybe he just needed time to get used to having a new family, even though he was old enough to know better. And maybe Ellie was just disappointed because instead of getting a cool big brother who'd look out for her, she got stuck with someone who treated her like garbage. Once Ellie hit 13, she started standing up for herself more. That's when things really went downhill. They'd fight about literally everything. Who got the TV remote, whose turn it was to use the washing machine, what to have for dinner, you name it. Kira and I were constantly playing referee, and honestly it was exhausting. We'd spend hours trying to sort out their stupid arguments that usually started over nothing. I kept thinking things would get better once Jill went to college, but nope, he picked a school like 20 minutes from our house so he could keep living at home. I tried pushing him to get a part-time job since he had all this free time in the evenings and weekends. I mean, he wasn't even doing that well in his classes, but he was too lazy to work. He'd just hang around the house all day playing video games and picking fights with Ellie. It was getting ridiculous. Things really hit rock bottom last year when Ellie had a friend over to study. Jill came downstairs and started making these horrible comments about her friend's appearance. When Ellie told him to apologize, he turned on her and started calling her fat and ugly. It turned into this massive screaming match right in our living room. Kira tried to get Jill to apologize, but he just stomped out of the house like a 5-year-old having a tantrum. The whole thing was a complete mess and Ellie's friend never came back to our house after that. Kira felt terrible and apologized to both girls, but damage was already done. When I got home and heard what happened, we decided enough was enough. Kira suggested family therapy, which seemed like our last option at this point. Jill threw a fit about going, saying he wasn't crazy and didn't need therapy. We had to cut off his allowance to get him to show up, but he just sat there with his arms crossed the whole time, refusing to participate. Total waste of money since he wouldn't even try. The only good thing that came out of therapy was that it actually helped Ellie and Kira's relationship. They'd been growing apart because of all Jill's drama, and the sessions gave them a chance to talk things through. But everything else stayed exactly the same. Year after year, Kira and I kept trying to get them to get along, but nothing worked. We basically gave up and just hoped Jill would move out for college, but of course that didn't happen either. Look, I've always tried to be fair with Jill. I'm not one of those stepdads who kicks their stepkids out the second they turn 18. I was actually hoping he'd finish college, find a decent job, and move out on his own terms. But what he did last week was so messed up, I'm seriously questioning whether bringing him into our lives was a huge mistake. So both kids go to this tennis school, same place where I met Kira actually. They're both pretty good players, though Jill's a bit more advanced since he's older. Lately he's been making Ellie's life absolute hell there. He started spreading all these rumors about her to everyone at the academy. At first it was just stupid stuff, but then he went way too far. Last Tuesday, Ellie came home from practice completely broken down. She ran straight to her room, locked the door, and wouldn't talk to anyone. She even skipped school the next day, which was super weird because she's usually such a good student. She's never missed a day unless she was seriously sick. When we tried asking Jill what happened since he was at practice too, he just sat there with this smug look on his face that made me extremely angry. I knew right away he'd done something really bad. I had to go to work the next day, but I couldn't stop worrying about Ellie. When I got back that evening, I peeked through her window and saw her just sitting there writing in her notebook. She still wouldn't come out or eat anything. Kira and I were freaking out but figured pushing her to talk might make things worse, so we backed off and gave her space. The whole situation was starting to really scare me. I'd never seen her shut down like this before. At dinner that night, Kira tried asking Jill again if he knew what was going on with Ellie, since she'd been fine until tennis practice. He just flat out said nope, no idea and kept eating. But then I caught him smirking across the table like he was enjoying some private joke. That's when I knew 100% that whatever was wrong with Ellie, this little jerk was behind it. He couldn't even hide how pleased he was with himself. I couldn't take it anymore and finally confronted him right there at the dinner table. I asked him straight up what he knew about all this, warning him he better not be involved. His response was just so arrogant. He just sat there and said it was all just harmless fun, like it was no big deal that Ellie had been crying in her room all day. Kira jumped in demanding to know what this fun was supposed to be. Jill just shrugged it off like it was nothing, saying he'd just spread some gossip around. When Kira kept pushing him to explain, he completely lost it. Started yelling about how we were overreacting and called Ellie a snowflake baby. I told him to watch his attitude and how he was talking to us, but he just got up and stormed out of the house like he always does when he's called out on his behavior. 20 years old and still throwing temper tantrums when he doesn't get his way. The whole thing was just ridiculous. After dinner, I went up to Ellie's room and knocked. She must have heard all the yelling downstairs because she finally opened the door. She was curled up on her couch looking totally miserable. I told her we knew Jill was behind whatever happened and asked her to tell us what was going on. She started crying right away. Kira went over to comfort her while she finally told us what Jill had done. He'd been telling everyone at tennis practice that she had a huge crush on their coach and was flirting with him to get extra practice time. The coach was this really tall guy, like 6 feet 4 inches, while Ellie's barely 5 feet 4 inches. Now everyone at tennis was making jokes about her trying to hit on this older guy who was literally a foot taller than her and twice her age. She explained through tears that she wasn't flirting at all, she was just quiet and respectful, unlike some of the other students who would talk back to him. It broke my heart seeing her like this. Ellie's always been this sweet, shy kid who just wants to work hard and do her best at everything. She's never been into drama or causing problems. And now Jill had dragged her name through the mud and humiliated her in front of everyone at tennis school. She was absolutely devastated. Just sitting there watching her cry, I wanted to both hug her and punch Jill at the same time. While we were all still trying to wrap our heads around what Jill had done, we didn't notice he'd been standing outside Ellie's door listening to everything. This idiot actually had the nerve to come into her room laughing about the whole thing. Kira lost it and started yelling at him, asking what the hell was wrong with him to do something like this. But Jill just stood there laughing, saying everyone at tennis thought it was hilarious and kept talking about it. Like he was proud of himself for humiliating his 15-year-old stepsister. I completely lost it. I was so close to actually hitting him, that's how angry I was. I just started screaming at him to get out of the house before I did something I'd regret. He tried to say something smart, but I just kept yelling until he left. Then I asked Kira to give me some time alone with Ellie. Once everyone was gone, I just hugged my daughter and told her how sorry I was for bringing Jill into our lives. I felt so guilty about everything she'd been through because of him. But Ellie, being the amazing kid she is, told me it wasn't my fault, it was all on Jill and his awful behavior. Even when she was hurting this bad, she was still trying to make me feel better. I couldn't stop thinking about how guilty I felt putting Ellie through all this drama. She's seriously the best kid anyone could ask for. Most teenagers would be blaming their parents for bringing a horrible step-sibling into their lives, but not Ellie. I made sure she ate something and promised her I'd fix this mess somehow. Later that night, I talked to Kira in our room about what happened. She was really worried about Ellie too. This wasn't just regular step-siblings fighting anymore. Jill was straight up bullying her, and we both knew we had to do something serious about it before things got even worse. The next morning, Kira tried talking to Jill. She told him flat out that what he did to Ellie was cruel and he needed to apologize. She also said he had to tell everyone at tennis that he made up those rumors and make sure nothing like this happened again. But Jill just looked at me with this attitude like I was forcing his mom to lecture him. Then he started yelling about how he wasn't going to apologize for what he called a joke. He said if Ellie couldn't handle it, that was her problem, not his. He refused to take back anything he said. The kid literally had zero remorse about humiliating his stepsister in front of everyone she knew at tennis. I was getting more frustrated by the second. This wasn't some dumb teenager being stubborn anymore, this was just pure meanness. I've been paying for everything since I married his mom, his college tuition, expensive tennis lessons, clothes, phone, everything. I treated him like he was my own kid, and this is how he acts? He couldn't even admit he'd done something wrong. So I told him straight up, either apologize or face consequences. He just laughed it off and asked what I was gonna do, ground him like he was some little kid. That's when I told him that I'd stop paying for his college tuition. That wiped the smirk right off his face. He tried pulling his usual trick, saying his mom wouldn't let me do that. Even Kira looked shocked when I said it. She definitely wasn't expecting that. But she backed me up anyway, telling him he needed to fix this mess if he didn't want to deal with what would happen. But Jill just did what he always does, stormed out and slammed the door like a bratty kid. Kira later told me she thought I was just trying to scare him straight. But I was dead serious about cutting off his tuition. Someone needed to teach this kid that actions have consequences. After Jill left, Kira asked if I was really serious about cutting off his tuition. I told her yes, if he doesn't apologize and fix this mess, I'm done paying for his college. She started freaking out, saying we can't mess up his whole future over this. I told her it's simple then, he just needs to man up and apologize. She went quiet after that because we both know Jill's too full of himself to ever admit he's wrong. I haven't told Kira this part, but I honestly think paying for his college is just throwing money away at this point. The kid doesn't care about school at all. He only went to college so nobody would expect him to get a job. It took him 4 years just to finish high school, and he's been in his first year of college for 2 years now. Like, what am I even paying for here? I really want him to learn that he can't just treat people like garbage and get away with it. But my only real options are either cutting off his tuition or making him pay rent to live here. The problem is, I'm worried doing either of those things might seriously damage my marriage. Kira's already upset about the tuition threat. Anyone have better ideas for dealing with this situation? I'm running out of options here. Update 1. Here's an update on everything that's happened. I actually went through with my threat and stopped paying Jill's tuition. He kept being a total jerk and wouldn't even admit what he did to Ellie was wrong. The whole thing was so awful that Ellie ended up quitting tennis completely, something she's loved doing since she was little. I tried telling Kira we needed to do something about Jill's behavior before things got even worse, but she was pretty helpless about the whole thing. Jill just thought I was bluffing about the tuition and would eventually cave, but he was dead wrong about that. When it came time to pay his semester fees, I didn't send the money. The college kept calling and emailing me about the unpaid tuition, but I ignored everything. Then literally one day before the payment deadline, Jill comes strolling into my office like everything's cool, saying, "Dude, when are you gonna pay the tuition? The accounts guy's chasing my butt." Speaking to me like I'm one of his frat buddies or something. I lost it. Told him straight up not to talk to me like that unless he wanted me to knock some sense into him. Made it clear I wasn't paying another cent for his education until he owned up to what he did and apologized to Ellie. But of course, he still thought he could get away with everything like always. I really thought not being able to go to college anymore would knock some sense into him. But nope, he just gave me this annoyed look and said, "You think this will make me apologize?" Then walked out like it was nothing. This kid would rather drop out of college than say sorry for being cruel to his stepsister. Then he actually went and dropped out of college. Kira was really upset about the whole thing. She kept saying she should have stepped in earlier and paid his tuition herself. She thought I'd give in at the last minute, but when she realized I was serious, she offered to pay it herself. Problem was, she didn't have that kind of money just sitting around. She would have had to empty out her savings account. She even went to the college trying to get them to give her more time to pay, but Jill had already gone to his advisor and dropped out. When she tried to help him, He turned it around on her, saying she wasn't supporting him and was choosing me and Ellie over him. The funny thing is, even after all this drama and his massive ego, he's still living in my house, eating my food and using my Wi-Fi. Kira doesn't make much money. Before we got married, she and Jill were barely getting by living in a tiny apartment. She had to work 2 jobs just to raise him. When we got married, I told her she could quit one or both jobs if she wanted to take it easier, but she kept one job just to have her own money. Kira was completely crushed by Jill dropping out. She kept begging him to just apologize to Ellie so he could go back to school next semester, but he flat out refused. He just dug his heels in deeper and wouldn't budge an inch. After dropping out, he actually got even worse, if you can believe it. He'd sleep until noon, then spend the whole day playing video games or hanging out with his friends. Didn't look for a job, didn't try to take any responsibility for his life. The thing that really got me was that he didn't even try to figure out how to pay for college himself. He just gave up completely. Like it wasn't even worth trying if someone else wasn't paying for it. This was just the start of Jill making one bad choice after another. I was getting more annoyed with him every day. Here I was giving this kid everything, paying for his education, giving him a nice place to live, all kinds of opportunities most people would kill for. And he threw it all away because his ego was too big to say sorry to a 15-year-old girl. After watching him waste away on my couch for weeks, I had to talk to Kira about it. I told her we needed to do something to teach him a lesson because clearly cutting off his tuition didn't work. He never cared about college anyway, so losing it wasn't really a punishment for him. The next day Kira and I sat down with Jill and told him he needed to get a job since he wasn't in school anymore. We said he couldn't just sit around the house all day expecting us to support him forever. This kid was literally on his phone while we were talking to him and didn't even bother looking up. Just said I'm working on it like we were interrupting his important social media time. I called him out right there, told him no, he wasn't working on anything. He was just sitting there waiting for me to keep throwing money at him like always. That wasn't happening anymore. Then this genius rolls his eyes and says he's going to start his own business. He just needs me to give him a loan. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This kid had just dropped out of college that I was paying for, was living in my house for free, and now had the nerve to ask me for money to start a business? When I asked if he was serious about wanting more money after everything he'd done, he just looked me dead in the face and said, yeah, why not? Like I owed him something. That was it for me. I'd tried being nice, tried helping him, tried everything I could think of, but he clearly had zero respect for me or anyone else in this house. So I gave him 2 options, either start paying rent and his share of the utilities, or get out. He just screamed fine. And stormed off like always. We figured maybe this would finally light a fire under him to look for work. But nope, he just kept doing the same nothing all day long. I told him he had 1 month to find a job and start paying his share of expenses. He acted like he had all the time in the world, just ignored everything I said. A month went by and absolutely nothing changed. Asked him if he'd found a job yet and he just said nope like it was no big deal. So I told him to pack his stuff and get out. You should have seen his face, looked at me like I'd just spoken alien language or something. He actually had the nerve to ask if I was kicking him out. I explained it wasn't about kicking him out, it was about him being an adult now and having to make adult choices. If he wasn't going to help pay for anything, he couldn't keep living here for free. That's when he completely lost it and started screaming that I wasn't his real dad, so I couldn't tell him what to do. I didn't back down though. Told him straight up that no, I wasn't his biological father, but I was the owner of the house he was living in and was the one who'd been supporting him this whole time. And I was done with that unless he started contributing something to this household. His choice was simple, either help pay for things or leave. So Jill stormed off to his room, slamming every door on the way. Few minutes later he came down with his bags packed and just left. Didn't even say goodbye to his own mom. Just walked out like that. Kira's been completely devastated since he left. She's been crying for days, and while I'm trying my best to be there for her, I also know we did the right thing. We couldn't keep letting him get away with treating everyone like garbage. At some point he needs to grow up and take responsibility for his actions. Then during one of our talks about the whole situation, Kira said something that hit me hard. She told me she wishes she'd left with him. When I asked what she meant, she said she knows what Jill did was wrong, but he's her son and he's still young. She feels like she abandoned him. He won't answer any of her calls and she's worried sick about where he is and if he's safe. Not gonna lie, that really knocked the wind out of me. I mean, I get it, he's her kid and she loves him no matter what. But I thought we were on the same page about making him face consequences for once in his life. I understand this is really hard for her as his mom, but having him around was making everyone else miserable. Been wondering if I went too far though. Am I the bad guy here for finally putting my foot down about his behavior? Update 2. Time for another update on this whole mess. After that conversation about her wanting to leave with Jill, things got really tense between me and Kira. We barely talked for a week. Ellie tried staying out of it by keeping busy with school stuff in her room, but I could tell she was feeling all the tension too. I finally couldn't handle the silence anymore. I had to know where things stood with us, so I just asked Kira straight up if she was actually planning to leave me and go after Jill. She looked absolutely exhausted, eyes all red from crying, and told me she honestly didn't know. Said she loves me but Jill's her only son and she feels like she just abandoned him. I tried explaining that this wasn't about abandoning him, it was about finally making him face some consequences and learn to be responsible for once in his life. If she keeps swooping in to save him every time he messes up, he's never going to grow up or change his behavior. Kira admitted I had a point, but said that didn't make any of this easier. She explained that when it comes to your kids, sometimes you know what's right but your heart doesn't care, you just want to protect them no matter what. Being a mom means sometimes logic goes out the window when your kid is involved, even if they're in the wrong. I understand where Kira's coming from, but I don't know what else to do here. I'm definitely not going to beg Jill to come back home, that would just teach him he can get away with anything. If he came back and actually apologized for how he's treated Ellie, maybe we could work something out. But we all know that's not happening, his ego's way too big to ever admit he did anything wrong. Update 3. It's been about 3 months now since everything went down. Kira finally heard back from Jill after trying to contact him like a million times. He's apparently crashing on some friend's couch in the next town over. Still won't admit he did anything wrong, but at least he found a part-time job, so that's something I guess. The biggest change has been in Ellie. She's finally starting to act like herself again now that Jill's gone. She even told me yesterday she wants to start tennis again, which is huge. Things between me and Kira are still pretty rough. We're trying to work through it because I really do love her. I just hope eventually she'll see that kicking Jill out wasn't about punishing him, it was about trying to force him to finally grow up and take responsibility for his actions. Sometimes being a parent means making the hard choices, even when it hurts.